It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza, good morning.
Hello, Irwin.
This is, Esperanza, this is, I think, whatever episode, we're in the 70s. I don't know which exact number, but I don't think I've been as excited for a podcast as I am for this one today.
I agree.
I tried to get a good night's sleep to gear up for it. So, we'll see if
Be fully prepared.
to be fully prepared. And just to give our audience, before we introduce our two very special guests, if you recall, Esperanza, this whole thing sort of happened organically through having Susan Horowitz from Hampton's 20th Century Modern as a guest on our podcast right at the time of their tour this past August. And Esperanza, as you probably remember, I woke up that morning without a ticket. But I said, I got on my bicycle and I biked down to where Tim Godbold, the founder of Hampton's 20th Century Modern, was selling the tickets. It was in the long-term parking lot in East Hampton Village.
Okay, so and just so you know, I didn't know all of this backstory. So
exactly. I like to surprise you too. I like to surprise you too once in a while. And that's when I took my bike and I went to a couple of the houses in East Hampton. But we're going to focus on one today. So I'm going to give myself that segue to introduce Ellin and Eliabeth Saltzman. Welcome to you both.
Hi. Thank you for having us. It's really exciting for us.
Oh, it's thank you. Thank you for saying that, but it's truthfully exciting for us. And to give a little bit of background, Ellin and Eliabeth's house, aptly named the Saltzman House, we're going to call it that, right? A Richard Meier design. Esperanza was on the Hamptons 20th Century Modern Tour.
So and in August 2024 is
exactly
where,
correct.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly correct. And now, Esperanza, I don't know if you were ever at the house personally, but I mean, you've seen millions of pictures. It's a Richard Meier house. It's just extraordinary in an extraordinary setting. So I think that's going to bring me to Ellin and Eliabeth. And, on Our Hamptons podcast, we always try to transport our audience back to a time and a place. So we're going to go back now. Well, we're going to go back to 1960s East Hampton. Ellin, you were coming out to East Hampton before 1960s. Am I correct?
Yes. When I was 6 years old, my parents sent me to Anita Zahn's School of the Dance, which was held in East Hampton for 4 weeks.
Oh.
Yes,
Because
I've
I was
heard
such a klutz.
And she still is. But thank goodness you went there.
I fell in love with East Hampton and begged my parents to come out, and they rented houses for the summer.
Oh.
And then when we got married, we stayed in inns.
Wow. Now,
so you really worked your way up in the sense of getting to know the area. Yeah, really. I love it.
And Esperanza, I mean, we always, and this is a topic that always resonates with us on Our Hamptons podcast. There was no Long Island Expressway till 1955, and it didn't go out to Riverhead until 1970. So, Ellin, when you were coming out with your parents, I mean,
Old Montauk Highway.
That was a trip. Am I correct? That was a trek to get out there, unless you were taking the railroad, right?
No, it was a trip, but it was a good trip.
I would say
it had a happy ending.
No question. Well, no question about
Yeah, but
that.
there also probably wasn't that type of traffic.
Exactly. Yeah, it took as long, but just flowing.
Exactly. So take us to again. Now this is a Richard Meier design. You're saying Richard Meier, you might as well say Frank Lloyd Wright. I mean, he's in that league. But to take our audience back to the mid 1960s, now, when you were looking for houses, did you start by looking for houses themselves, or did you say to yourself, we want to buy land and we want to build something special?
My husband and I were renting for the summers. And when the rent became over $2,000 for the summer,
Right.
he said, this is way too expensive. We have to buy something or build something.
Wow.
And we looked at houses to buy. And then a friend of my parents said, why don't you look at this property and stand on the top of your car to see where it goes? And the property was Spaith Lane. And when we stood on the top of the car, we saw the ocean and fell in love.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also Dad was such a you're both such creatives, you know, you working in fashion and Dad was an interior designer. He had a real vision.
Right.
And you both were visionaries in the sense that you understood to stand Renny pulling you on the top of a car to look, and they could see it. They could see what they wanted to do, which is the story you've told me and Dad told me so much.
Oh my gosh.
And was it through your fields of work that you knew of Richard Meier?
No, I went to the beach. We put a bid on the property, and I went to the beach and sat down with my close friend and said, oh my God, we just bought this piece of property and I don't know what to do. And my husband said, I have to find an architect. And she said, we just bought property and we found this great architect who we knew from New Jersey, and his name is Richard Meier. Why don't you meet him? And that's how it happened.
Amazing.
Yeah. You know, Esperanza.
So it was meant to be, really.
You know, Esperanza, I would participate more, but I have such chills listening to this story that it's like literally difficult for me to get the words out, because that's I mean, that's just incredible. And needless to say, Spaith Lane, this is a prime, one of the most beautiful streets in East Hampton Village. But it also should be noted, since Ellen gave us the segue for Richard Meier, you know, this is not the Richard Meier of all of these, you know, monumental projects that we now know Richard Meier of. This was someone when, yeah, he was in his early 30s when you met him. I mean, I did a little research on it. He was 29 when he started his own firm, and made him 33 or so when you started working with him. So you were recommended to him, but he was he was sort of a relative unknown at the time. I mean,
totally.
But he
was friends with Charlie with all the other
right.
super architects.
Right,
Well,
right.
They were all starting out.
It was the cool kids.
And the person that introduced me was Anita Hoffman, and it was the Hoffman house, which was his first house.
Oh,
Right.
yes.
Right. Right. Because, yeah, I mean, Elizabeth, to your point that there was weren't they called the Group of Five or something? There was a term for them, right?
Yes.
It was him, Gwathmey, and a few others.
Yeah, those groups are generally composed of men, I find. It's very interesting.
There was no female architect in
But
it.
that was a different time. Now we're going to
Absolutely. No, I know.
look back on these good old days in 20 years and go, look at what we women did.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my mom is a pioneer in the women's world. She was the only one working. And that's, you know, of all of my friends growing up, all of them,
I was the only working mother.
she was the only working mom.
You're a pioneer.
And a leader, and a real leader. So, and so for you to take those steps with Richard, it was really interesting. Of course, I don't remember anything because
You weren't there.
I was there.
Well,
I was this big.
Yeah.
Right.
But I was there, but I wasn't aware of what was going on. But to have the stories over, you know, the last 59 years of this place, and everything that went on is really interesting for me growing up and soaking up every piece of information. Also to note, this is a home. It's not a showcase.
Right.
We live in the same home that I was born and raised in.
Which is
And my mom kept it to your credit, you didn't go and destroy it.
No.
And Dad, you know, really had an eye, and few things changed interior, but few.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And, you know,
well, and that's a testament also to the architect, I might say, because you have made a life there and been comfortable there and haven't found the need to change anything, which is really
testament to the architect combined with my
combined with with
The
with your
interior designer, because
The fights are real.
yeah.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, and Esperanza, you mentioned that, how that Gang of Five was met. I mean, Ellin is being very modest. I mean, she was. We could do we could do 10 podcasts on the Ellin Saltzman career. I mean, she was a powerhouse in the fashion industry during that era. At a time, to her, what she was saying, when it wasn't all that common, for women to have those positions. But that's a conversation, really for another day. But we touch on all of these things. I mean, again, thinking back, to the era, a very different East Hampton, a theme, Esperanza, you and I constantly talk about here. And, we also talk about, and this is something we were just getting into when I digress, but, the essence of why people build today in East Hampton or on Eastern Long Island in general, it was not the same vision that the Saltzmans had. And it's about, we've seen Norman Jaffe houses destroyed to build it 18,000 homage to oneself. To Ellin and Elizabeth's point, and this is really where I want to, this was a family home. And when you were building this, now the house is about 4,000 square feet. So, I mean, it wasn't tiny, obviously, but obviously compared to today's standards, when 4,000 square feet is the primary bedroom, it was a little different. But when you were building this house, engaging Richard Meier, what were those specific objectives? Like, did you say to him, we just want a home for our family. This is a retreat. Like, how did you get that point across?
We kept saying, we want a house that we can come home to and go out. It was meant to be an outdoor house.
Yeah, my father always told me that your bedroom is for sleeping, not for playing. and all we had in our bedrooms were beds, a wardrobe, and a desk for one to do your homework on, and that's it. And you weren't it was about, we were kicked out of the house pretty much every morning at 7:30 and told to return home in time for dinner. And we're given the big $1.50 so we could bike ride to Main Beach and have saltwater taffy, Coca-Colas, Italian ices, and the worst, greasiest hamburger ever. And we still do it.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it was the fun of being outside. My father and mother really believed that since we were city kids, the idea was to be not in the country, but to be in a community that was outside, because my mother knew that we were in one of 5 places. They never had to check, but we were either at the
Main Beach
playing tennis, right, where you were usually at. My dad was always in the garden. There was the library.
Right. It was understood,
Yeah. And also they had such a network of friends. We had a party line when we first started. We had a party line. There wasn't even a private home line. It was 4 houses sharing a telephone line.
Wow.
But not like Little House on the Prairie. It's just, it wasn't needed. You knew that you'd go to Main Beach. You knew if you wanted to be cool, you'd go to Georgica Beach. Then you knew if you're going really wackadoodle, you'd go to Amagansett. And then for our special trips, we would go to Montauk for lobster. Yeah. But always with an artist community, like all people creative. You had such incredible friends.
The people in East Hampton in those days were fantastic.
They still are.
Yeah.
More of them.
It's just more of
authors and actors. And
my parents had a lot of parties. An enormous amount of entertaining was done.
My husband loved to entertain.
Yeah, and you would show up perfectly, looking great.
I made place cards.
Yeah, and you did them beautifully. But my dad loved to entertain, but you never knew what was coming. So I didn't know if there was going to be, I didn't know who anybody was, obviously, but what was so exciting was you didn't know if someone was going to show up in a bikini with a bunny tail on, or if they were going to show up in a tuxedo, or if there was going to be a performance on the 3rd floor, deck, and we'd be watching from the living room. And you had so much fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
Esperanza, Ellin and Elizabeth have just, by the way, these two could be hosts of Our Hamptons podcast, Esperanza, because, all right,
Truly.
I mean, they have hit, this is, yes, we have an outline, Our Hamptons podcast audience, no question about it, but these things are just, this is a conversation that is just happening so naturally, and things that they just touched on, Esperanza. The kids going out from 7:30, just go and we'll see you at 6 o'clock. That was Leisure-Rama in Montauk.
Yeah.
That was Sands in Sag Harbor, the three African American enclaves. It was this. That was Mike Solomon at the same era in the early 70s when his parents, Sid Solomon, the artist, go to Georgia Beach and leave us alone. We'll see you at the end of the day. I mean, these are themes that are.
It's the story of my life too.
And that's correct. Okay.
Really?
Yes.
I think it's the community, and that's what it was. It wasn't a who has more. It wasn't a who's who. It was a community, a trusted, safe community that had no seatbelts.
Yeah.
Wow.
Or helmets.
Or helmets.
Yeah, or helmets. But seatbelts meaning it would be a wild ride and you knew you were okay. It's like I mean, I think about you and your orange Mustang convertible that everyone knew. There goes Ellin. There goes Ellin.
Yeah. Yeah. Esperanza, I am telling you, I am so transported right now to like whatever. This is like early 1970s East Hampton. I'm now envisioning Ellin, in that orange convertible. I mean, my God.
Short tennis skirt. Everybody called her Mrs. Robinson. All of my friends called her Mrs. Robinson.
And I love playing that role.
Yeah.
Oh my.
No, you love playing tennis. We were not, by the way, because she was a working mother, the weekends were, yes, surrounded by her kids, but it was also for her to rest and for my dad to relax for a minute. And I love that every day something new would happen, and there was no routine. It was let her sleep in the morning. My dad would make breakfast. We'd go off and do whatever. And then we knew there would be some sort of sport, always the beach, but also it was about which friends were coming around. Right. And that's where I got most of my education.
And I wasn't the best mother.
She was an epic mother because she taught me work ethics and love and support. And shoved me into learning how to write place cards really well.
I have no doubt. I remember my own children. My wife worked full time. For the entire period, and in Great Neck, Long Island, which was where we lived. There were many a family where, when we went to open school, Rachel, my wife, was the only working mother interacting with the others. So I understand the experience through osmosis in my own life that Ellin and and Elizabeth you were talking about. But no, Elizabeth, you have one brother. Do you have is there another sibling, or was just the two of you?
Just the two of us. I have one epic brother who is a saint and should be sainted. Should get a sainthood. Yeah, he's so cool. He's so wonderful.
And both of your summers were always, so were you out there for the entire summer? Were you more or less back and forth when you were growing for your coming of age years, I'm going to call it?
I had to wait until I was 15 to convince them that I could stay out there by myself on the weekend, on the weekdays, because my mother made sure that I had a job. Right. You had to have a job. We always did a trip. My dad would take us somewhere to educate us about some art, or when you were usually working at shows, we'd try and find my mom in Rome or in somewhere for 2 weeks, but it was always educational, and really, really fun. And my dad would give me house tours mentally. So he'd say, one day you'll go to X person's house, and I want you to understand that that's a Picasso and that's a Monet, and and this architect did it, and so summers were for fun, but were also educational.
And your friends, like, it was local families, your friends from New York. It was a whole.
It was naughty. It was so fun. It was fun because in those days, it then was the late 70s, early 80s, and that was a good time. That was post a lot of bad times in the world. Still free love moments, pre-AIDS and HIV. So it was fun. And Hamptons magazine had just started, and like there it was kind of becoming a bit more of a scene. And a lot of people would rent houses, group shares. And you had your sort of Fire Island group, and then you had your Amagansett group, and you had, people, if you were in Southampton, you weren't hanging with the East Hamptons.
Right.
Exactly.
It was separated.
Very
And
much,
it wasn't by religion, like everyone thinks. It was just a different run of show.
yeah,
And
different
it wasn't
community.
mixed up. And it seemed like a really far away place to go. Like to go to Montauk we knew we were going for dinner, but not just for dinner. We were gonna spend the day doing something funny and fun, and end up, having lobster bibs on, and or going to lunch, our favorite place.
But your times, and again, it's just everything comes back to so many of the podcasts we've done. Esperanza, like when we talked about Asparagus Beach and the grouper houses and everything else, that was also sort of also during this time period. But it's so heartwarming for me, just to hear what this house has meant to you and your family. And again, to touch on something Esperanza and I talk about also, and Elizabeth, you just alluded to it. The place today, it almost, and this is a line we actually stole this line from William Pickens from Sag Harbor. Are we a community or a commodity? And today, it's sadly,
No, it's both. I'm fighting and keeping our community alive. My mom has kept that house as it is so that we can have a community there. One thing that was great about the late 70s all the way through to last summer is we have parties, and we bring people together that maybe don't get a chance to be in the Hamptons or to see open land. One thing that's so great about this house that you guys did so beautifully was situate the house sort of in a corner and keep everything clean, and put the pool a block away.
totally.
Because that meant, and that was the rule that you had with Dad for David and I, was you can do whatever you want as long as you don't leave the house, right? So you have everybody over. They didn't want us driving at night. They didn't want me on my bicycle with the flashlight trying to get to Amagansett. The idea was bring over people. You're not allowed in the house. So you guys hang outside, and it worked beautifully.
And he wanted the pool away from the house so he didn't hear kids.
That's what I'm saying.
And I, again, having been on the property during that day, that's exactly what it was like. Elizabeth and Ellen don't know it, Esperanza, but I actually slept a few nights in that gorgeous house right by the pool, but they don't know that's part of the story yet. But it literally is like a city block away to go from the house to the pool. But I remember, Elizabeth, when I visited the house, and you were telling me about the house itself, and we should really tell our audience, to sort of try to let them understand that there is a pool that's really set away from the house. There is a pool house next to it that had, a little bedroom. I mean, a beautiful house. And you literally would walk across this expansive lawn to get to the main house, which is not a McMansion, was never a McMansion. It had nothing, no feeling like that. It had the feeling you're exuding. Now, I remember, Elizabeth, you telling me this house is not well insulated. It was chilly in the winter, right?
We did not winter out there, because it was, well, in those days you could turn on the heat, and it didn't cost $400,000 to heat the house for the season. So in those days we had always had a fire going.
Yep.
We always hung out in the living room, but it was we loved it, and you still love it in the winter. She loves it, and it is always usable. But the idea was for outdoors, more so than in the winter. Like, we wanted to be during the school year, you want to be with your friends.
Right.
And our friends weren't there. So a lot of times we got left in the city because they loved to go out there. And David and I were just like,
I'm not going.
We're not going.
Right.
Because it's not fun at that point. It's too cold to ride your bicycle. Now it's not too cold, but it gets cold and unfun, and half of or even less than half, most of our mates were gone. for the winter.
Yeah.
So we fought to stay there. But I love the fact that the lawn would be sometimes a softball field, sometimes a party field,
And sometimes a croquet field.
croquet. We played a lot of croquet.
Oh.
And I hated it because my brother would whack my ball way out of that and I could never catch up.
Wow.
Amazing.
But it was really fun. And I love the fact that you guys didn't decide to be gluttonous and build a tennis court or something there, because it could fit something else.
Right. Yeah. You mean you have, what is it, 3 acres? Is it? Or more?
Almost 3 acres.
Almost 3. Yeah. I mean, definitely in today's world, you would shoehorn, every imaginable amenity into the
It's not a
space.
giant pool. It's not a jacuzzi. There isn't one.
Right.
It's a
spa.
pool,
Yeah.
and it's a shower and it's a place to hang out with
And
the
the
kitchen.
pool house was just redone.
Yeah, it was a kitchen before, but Richard just finished it before.
He stopped working.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So even that was a later addition, but he also
That was 50 years later.
There was a small pool house, but not with bedrooms.
Yeah, it just had a kitchen and actually not even a kitchen, like a half kitchen and a shower and a really cool bathroom. So this was because all of us grew up and we had children and we needed a few more bedrooms.
Yeah.
A little bit more privacy. And some modern amenities like air conditioning, which was never built into this house because you didn't need it.
That's right.
Well, we always,
because people didn't have these giant hedges. So it's not just that the earth is getting so much hotter, which is obviously part of it, but there's no airflow with all of these giant houses and hedges.
That's exactly right. The ocean breezes don't reach us anymore, really. It's you're right. It's so true. But that's the case. I mean, in our family home, we never had air conditioning until I think the early 2000s. I mean, it was like, then it became unbearable. You didn't want to have to deal with the heat that was more extended. But early on, it's just what you're saying. You didn't need it. It was wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, it was, it's again, touching on so many themes. We often lament, the overuse of screening, the walls of they're living walls, literally. And Esperanza will often talk about how the light has changed so dramatically out here due to all
because
of this.
Of that. Yeah.
So
well, that's why artists aren't flocking out there. There's no more land. There's no more. I love all the houses on Further Lane that have the land, and I'm so grateful that they haven't built up, and I'm grateful that, the Maidstone hasn't changed their golf course to be something else, and not that we could ever go there. But we won't talk about that.
They're pretty. The Maidstone does seem to be rather respectful of the community. In terms of
not letting people in.
Oh no, we're not going down a road like that. Or we
no, never.
We avoid all controversy on Our Hamptons podcast. I assure you.
No. It's not about controversy. Actually, I love the Maidstone because they haven't made it an overcrowded area.
They're rebuilding at the moment.
Well, they need to.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're renovating and this is, and even what you mentioned of Further Lane, as you will recall, Elizabeth, you used to ride your bicycle down Further Lane and it wasn't this corridor, like a hallway with walls on either side of hedging, which it is today. And so I appreciate the open areas, which it's all agricultural land, as we know it used to be, and it still is considered.
We're a potato field.
Right, exactly, which you could see straight across, like 2 Mile Hollow. That corner was straight through. You could see to the dune.
Right.
The pride I felt as a young person coming home to you guys with potatoes, blueberries, raspberries, and blackberries, because I picked them on the way home.
On the way.
Because that's what the natural ground was. Meanwhile, I didn't understand those were pretty much rotten potatoes. but I was so proud as a little kid, to gather up this free food.
What an experience to be able to have that, which nowadays is very, very, very rare.
Yeah. And now I did read that it was actually an old potato field. Was it still being farmed at that time, or was it not at the point when you were buying the land? Well, it couldn't have been being farmed by then.
Farmed.
Yeah. Esperanza often talks about how she walks through the farm field when she was going to school on Our Hamptons podcast, and
It's a parking lot.
that's now a parking lot. Right out of the Joni Mitchell song. But you know, starting to push this through to start wrapping a couple of the things up. In terms of really taking it to present day, Ellin and Eliabeth. Uh, you know, the 800-pound gorilla in the wall is something we discussed. Houses like this on properties like this, no one would build something like this today on 3 gorgeous Spaith Lane acres.
It's also illegal. You can't get the glass anymore.
Well, that's true. Yes. The 3 stories might not fly.
And again, look, no one knows, terms of the future. I mean, you obviously still enjoy the house and love the house, but does it ever worry you, concern you that, wow, if we ever sell this property, is someone actually going to come in here and, do something to this Richard Meier house?
Well, let's put it this way. My son, the angel,
Right.
is supporting me and living there with me.
Hey, me too.
And
I support you.
but so he's paying all the expenses of the house.
Right.
And I think he would love to sell it.
No. Oh my gosh, no, she's got that. You've got that so wrong. So David and I talk offline all the time. The idea is to not sell it, but it's to maintain it, because if we did sell it, we'd never be able to be home. And there is no other family home. The problem is that the house is X amount of years old and needs to be maintained. And the idea would be to do something luxurious, like rent it for a minute and then solve some of the problems, right? But at the same time, we're like, we'll just work a little harder and figure it out. I don't think it's to sell it. And we talk about it all the time. And the idea is to keep it, or to make sure if it ever came to a point where we had to sell it or we chose to sell it, to make sure that it was sold to someone who would either move the house to a place where it could live and not be destroyed, because there are plenty of those areas coming up in America that people are doing that. Or it would be to sell it to someone who appreciates the architecture and would add on and maybe buy another piece of land close by and combine them. And I think that's the future, if there is one without the house. But it would never be to destroy it, because why would we destroy our home?
Oh, I know you wouldn't.
No, yeah, we're more concerned about others, and that's
We wouldn't let it happen.
Yeah, that's
right.
That's
People
wonderful.
that have come to buy it, there was a moment where we thought we might have to do something like that. And I called up the one friend who bought a very famous house nearby, and he said, I would just restore this to perfection and, add in all the amenities and buy that property next door. And that was music to my ears and a solve, but don't know if you'd be able to find people like that now.
I mean, there are people
They
with those
exist.
sensibilities, but they're somewhat, far and few between. Esperanza, when
Yes.
we did the podcast about the Seven Sisters in Montauk, we referenced how how a realtor would talk about how majestic and important and wonderful these houses are, adding the caveat, but it's not what today's buyer wants.
Right.
At all.
And that's
I
where
think-
the
And the
dilemma
only
is.
reason that those continue to exist are because they are landmarked. And so they're preserved, pretty much the way they were.
Which is also
conceived.
dangerous, because if you landmark it and we want to do something to it, we can't.
Well, that's we can talk about that offline, but
No,
but it's
I
not
love-
exactly the most prohibitive thing. So
I think, sorry.
it's a hard conversation for most people to have with regard to landmarking and being on a national register. And there are all sorts of myths about this, but lo and behold, if you were on the national register and you did rent your house and you decided that you needed to have some maintenance work done, you might have some opportunity to use federal tax credits for that maintenance work. So, these are things that I'm kind of getting familiar with, but that most people don't have any clue about, and that would give you a certain distinction and also help to preserve the house. And so, there are many.
We've become very familiar with the rules, extremely. We've done about 12 years worth of homework, and then the last 2 years, very serious homework, because I have another house in Watermill, and it's in the same situation, and we're getting all this planning for it. But
Good.
I think there's always, when there's a will, there's a way.
Right.
And right now there's many wills, and we really want to stay at home and make sure, I think the world is actually getting better, and people are realizing, well, no, I think the world is getting worse, but I think that the community is getting better. And I think people are realizing that, and good people are realizing, they don't need 25,000 square foot homes or 100,000 square foot homes. They need communities. So hopefully they're buying 5 parcels of land and building 5 smaller homes so that they can have their brother, mother, father, sister, which is what's happened around us.
Yeah. I mean,
and at the end of the road has bought up all of like a few houses on Spade Lane, as well as on 2 Mile Harbor and Hollow, and is doing that for his family.
Yeah. And hopefully there is a movement, back towards that. And again, we really deserve
through your podcast.
Yeah.
You make people interested through Hampton's 20th century, like that really helps tell the story, and people don't see houses torn down. And they want to preserve them because they recognize that soon there won't be a Hamptons.
That's right.
History.
That's right. And this is a problem that's not exclusive to Eastern Long Island. There's, Palm Springs, California has a huge modernist district. And I mean, I'm sure they face similar kinds of development pressures. Look, we could get into all sorts of, the income inequality has risen to a point, back when, you purchased this magnificent property, people that made a good living were able to purchase something like this. Now it's in a different stratosphere.
Yeah.
Wow. This was really, I can't tell you how much we enjoyed speaking to you. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share with us?
No, I just hope the house lives on.
It will.
And my family lives
It
on.
will.
Oh my gosh. And so do we. And it is such a special house. And what a,
Because let me say, it's not just a house. Well, first of all, it looks like a piece of sculpture, but it is a home. It really is a home. And from what you've described, and that's what really makes the place. It's not just because it's a Richard Meier piece. It's not just because it's your house. It's because you made it a home. And that's what's important. That's why people preserve things.
You've done good, kid.
I second that exactly. Yes, Richard Meier did create a piece of art for you, no question about it, through your design and through your inspiration, everything, both from all of your backgrounds, but you made it the place that it was. And I mean, I'm so grateful that you shared your experience of living in a home like this in a very different East Hampton, in a very different era. This is an episode I know that's going to resonate so deeply with our audience, and we're so grateful for the time you spent with us today. So
thank you so much.
Thank
you for doing what you do, because it's pretty exciting. Now you got me tuned into your podcasts, and learned a lot that houses I didn't even know. But I know them so well, but I didn't understand any of their history. And that's what's so cool about your podcast, is really the education. I feel like I've got part of my family back who would say, hey, mentally, now I'm going to walk you through a house and what happens. So I feel like, in a weird way,
Daddy is here.
He brought me to you guys. So thanks.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That means so much for especially coming from the two of you. But I mean, look, that's been our mission. I mean, it's not about who ate dinner where. It's about the history, the folklore, and really the sense of place, that still exists with all of the with all of the obvious pressures. But
Sam's Pizzeria still exists in East Hampton.
East
So
Hampton.
that's the greatest thing.
And we
like,
still go there.
yeah,
Yes.
still the special night out.
I couldn't
It's
agree
pretty
more.
cool that history is alive.
Yes.
Yes. Well, and thank you both for being you. Really, that's the
Yeah, I mean,
the best
you
part.
couldn't find two more genuine people than Ellin and Eliabeth Saltzman. What an absolute delight for us. And thank you both. And Esperanza,
Thank you.
as always, a pleasure.
So nice to meet you both.
Nice to meet you
Thank
as well.
Have a great day, everybody.
I hope
Thank
you
you.
meet you in person.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.